The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Cameras flashed like lightning, hungry for tears, scandal, and blood. Reporters whispered as the doors opened, and Grace Miller stepped inside, thin, pale, holding two sleepy toddlers with identical hazel eyes. Every head turned. Some pitied her. Most didn't bother hiding their smirks. At the front, Liam Carter sat beside his attorney, looking like he owned the world. The Billionaire CEO adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tight, his smirk sharper than the edge of a blade. Beside him, Madison Hale, his rumored mistress, crossed her legs and leaned back with quiet arrogance. She wore a white dress, as if mocking innocence itself. "Look at her," someone whispered from the gallery. "She came with both kids? How desperate." Grace heard it. She kept walking, her worn heels echoing on the marble floor. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, but nothing could prepare her for the humiliation of standing 10 feet away from the man who once swore to love her forever. Liam glanced up for barely a second. "You look exhausted," he said coldly. "You should have hired a nanny instead of begging for sympathy." Madison let out a soft laugh that carried across the silent courtroom. It sounded like glass breaking. Grace wanted to scream. Instead, she stood taller. "I didn't come here for sympathy," she said quietly. "I came for justice." The judge entered, a stern-looking man with silver hair and the kind of calm authority that could silence chaos. The bailiff called the case, Carter versus Miller. Cameras stopped clicking. The room froze. Madison's glossy red lips curved into a smirk as she reached under the table to squeeze Liam's hand. To the world, they were the perfect couple now. Young, glamorous, unstoppable. Grace was just a footnote, a sad woman who had lost everything. "Mrs. Miller," the judge began, "this is your final hearing. Do you have representation?" Grace hesitated. Her lawyer had quit last night after receiving an anonymous threat. "No, Your Honor," she said, "but I'll speak for myself." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Liam's attorney chuckled. "This should be quick." But then the doors swung open again. A man in a dark gray suit walked in, steady, calm, carrying a briefcase. Noah Bennett. The one man Grace never expected to see again. He approached the bench, his voice steady. "Your Honor, I'll be representing Mrs. Miller from this moment forward." Liam's confident smile faltered. Madison's hand froze midair. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her perfectly made-up eyes. And then Noah leaned close to Grace, whispering, "He's not ready for what we've got." Grace swallowed, her pulse hammering. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't end the way Liam thought. Because hidden in Noah's briefcase was a document that could destroy everything Liam and Madison had built. Rain slammed against the windows like 1,000 fists the night Grace Miller's world collapsed. The mansion that once felt like a dream had become a cold museum filled with echoes of betrayal. She stood in the grand foyer, trembling, holding her belly, 8 months pregnant with twins. Her husband, Liam Carter, stood at the top of the marble staircase, looking down at her like she was a stranger trespassing in his house. "Liam, please," Grace begged, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. I never touched the company account. Someone set me up." "Enough." His voice was sharp enough to slice through her soul. "You think I don't know what you've been doing? Using my name to move funds from Carter Holdings? Do you realize how that makes me look?" "I didn't," she cried. "I was home, sick every day you said you were traveling." "Wise? That's right," another voice purred from behind him. Madison Hale stepped into view, wearing one of Grace's silk robes as if it already belonged to her. Her wet hair glistened under the chandelier, and her smirk was cruel. "You really should have checked your husband's phone more often, sweetheart. Ignorance doesn't make you innocent." Grace's breath caught. You're his assistant. You told me you'd help organize the charity account." Madison laughed softly. "Oh, I did. I just organized it into my favor." Liam didn't stop her. His silence was worse than the insults. He descended the stairs, grabbed Grace's arm, and shoved a small envelope into her hand. "Here, divorce papers. Sign them before the week's over." She stared at the papers as if they were foreign. "You can't do this, you promised." "I promised you a life," he interrupted. "You gave me embarrassment." "You're done, Grace. I'm not raising someone else's kids or your charity projects." Tears blurred her vision. "These are your children, Liam. Our children." For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, but it vanished. "Get out before I call security." The storm outside howled as she staggered toward the door. She clutched her belly, feeling the twins move, as if they knew what was happening. Her suitcase waited on the porch, packed, rain-soaked, and already forgotten. She turned once more, desperate for a trace of the man she once loved. "One day, you'll regret this." Madison's laughter rang out behind her. "The only thing he'll regret is wasting time on you." Lightning cracked across the sky as Grace stepped into the rain. Her shoes sank into puddles, her body shaking from the cold and the betrayal. She kept walking until her strength gave out. She collapsed on the side of the road, soaked, alone, clutching her belly. A car's headlights sliced through the downpour, screeching to a halt. A man jumped out. Noah Bennett, Liam's former attorney. "Grace?" His voice was urgent, panicked. "What happened?" She tried to speak, but only sobs came out. Noah scooped her into his arms and rushed her into the car. "Hold on. You're gonna be okay." As the car sped through the storm toward the hospital, Grace felt the first contraction rip through her body. Pain and fear blurred together, but under it all something harder began to take root: resolve. If she survived this night, she would never beg again. She would rise. And when she did, Liam Carter and Madison Hale would finally understand what it meant to lose everything. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as nurses rushed through the hallway, their shoes squeaking on polished floors. Grace lay on a gurney, drenched, trembling, her contractions coming faster now. Noah Bennett held her hand, his face pale but calm. "You're safe," he said softly. "Just breathe, Grace. I've got you." Her fingers tightened around his. She wanted to believe him, but fear had a way of sinking its claws deep. Everything she had was gone. Her husband, her home, her name. All she had left were the two tiny lives fighting to come into the world. Hours blurred into minutes. Pain came in waves. Somewhere between the screaming and the chaos, Grace heard the faint cry of her first child. A boy. Then, seconds later, another, his twin brother. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Ethan and Eli." "They're strong," said the nurse, smiling, "just like their mother." But when the doctor asked for the father's information, Grace froze. Her throat tightened. He's not coming," she whispered. Noah stepped forward. "Write down my number. I'll handle the paperwork." Grace looked at him in confusion. "Why would you help me?" "Because," Noah said, his voice steady, "someone has to do what's right, and Liam Carter stopped doing that a long time ago." He left the room before she could thank him. 2 days later, Grace sat by the window, rocking her newborns. Outside, the city glistened under the washed-out morning light. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace, until the nurse walked in, holding an envelope. "This came for you, ma'am, delivered by a courier." Grace frowned and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an eviction notice. Her hospital bills had been paid in full, but her health insurance had been canceled under her husband's company plan. She was no longer covered. The address listed under her name had already been transferred to Mr. Liam Carter and fiancée, Ms. Madison Hale. Grace's chest constricted. Liam had erased her completely, like she never existed. In another part of the city, Liam poured champagne into 2 crystal flutes. Madison lounged on the couch in silk pajamas, scrolling through her phone. "Everything's trending," she said, smirking. "Poor wife kicked out. Public sympathy lasts 2 days tops. By next week, no one will even remember her name." Liam chuckled. "Perfect. She was nothing but dead weight. I'm done carrying her." Madison sipped her drink and leaned closer. "And what about the kids?" "What about them?" Liam said coldly. "If they're mine, she can keep them. I don't need the drama." Madison's smile faltered. "You're really that heartless?" "Heartless built this empire," he said, turning away. "Don't forget that." But the universe has a way of keeping score. While Liam celebrated his freedom, a hospital intern posted a short clip online, a trembling video of Grace in labor, whispering her son's names while thunder roared outside. The caption read, "Abandoned by a billionaire, but still fighting for love." Within hours, the clip went viral. Millions of strangers watched, shared, cried, and asked one question: who would do this to her? Grace didn't know it yet, but the world was beginning to turn in her favor. And far away, in the Carter penthouse, Liam's phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "Justice is coming, and she's not alone. 3 years can either break you or rebuild you." For Grace Miller, they did both. The woman who once stood crying in a hospital gown was gone. In her place was someone new, calmer, sharper, quietly strong. She lived in a small apartment above a bookstore in downtown Seattle, where she taught piano lessons to neighborhood kids. Her twins, Ethan and Eli, filled the space with laughter, crayons, and the scent of pancakes every Sunday morning. Money was tight, but peace was priceless. Grace had learned how to survive on her own, without the shadow of Liam Carter haunting her every step. She never spoke his name. She didn't need to. Still, some nights, when the boys were asleep, she would look at the city lights and whisper, "One day, they'll know the truth." That one day came sooner than she expected. It started with a magazine cover. Grace was leaving the corner cafe when her eyes caught the glossy page on the newsstand. Liam Carter and Madison Hale, the power couple of the year. The photo showed Liam in a tailored suit, Madison in a red gown, both smiling as if nothing ugly had ever happened between them. Grace's stomach twisted. Beneath the photo was the headline, "Carter Holdings expands into education funding, giving back to underprivileged kids." She froze. That was her idea. Her charity concept, the one she drafted years ago for her music scholarship project, the one Liam had mocked. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. There it was, her proposal, word for word, with Madison Hale's signature at the bottom. For a moment, the old pain came rushing back. But then something harder replaced it. Anger. Later that night, Grace sat at her kitchen table while the twins colored nearby. She opened her laptop and searched Carter Holdings scandal rumors. Dozens of articles appeared, accusations of tax manipulation, employee cover-ups, and one familiar name buried deep in the details, Noah Bennett. Her heart skipped. Noah, the man who had once carried her through the rain, the lawyer who vanished after that night. She clicked the link. The article revealed that Noah had left Liam's firm after exposing an illegal offshore fund. He disappeared into independent legal work, specializing in corporate fraud. And rumor had it, he was now based in Seattle. Grace stared at the screen, her reflection faint against the glow. Maybe fate wasn't done with her story yet. The next morning, she walked into a quiet law office downtown. The receptionist looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Grace said, "but tell Mr. Bennett, Grace Miller is here." When Noah entered the lobby, his expression softened from surprise to relief. "You found me. I didn't mean to," she said. "But maybe it's time we both stopped running." He nodded slowly. "You saw the magazine?" Grace's lips tightened. "He's using my idea, again." Noah sighed. "Liam's untouchable right now. Unless—" He paused, studying her face. "Unless you're willing to fight." Grace looked toward the window where her twins' reflections shimmered faintly on the glass from the daycare across the street. "For them," she said quietly, "I'll fight for them." Noah smiled faintly. "Then let's give Liam Carter a reason to remember your name." Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, steady, familiar. But this time, Grace didn't feel broken by it, because 3 years ago, the rain had washed her away. Now it was washing her clean. And soon, the woman Liam threw away was coming back for everything he stole. The Bright Futures Gala glittered like a diamond cut from sin. Held at the prestigious Astoria Grand Hotel, it was the event of the year. A parade of millionaires, media moguls, and politicians pretending to save the world with charity money. But tonight, all eyes were on one couple. Liam Carter and Madison Hale made their entrance like royalty. Cameras flashed, reporters screamed their names, and Madison's red gown shimmered under the chandeliers. Her smile was perfect, practiced, poisonous. She leaned into Liam's arm, whispering loud enough for the cameras to catch. "It's our night, baby. Let them see what real success looks like." Liam adjusted his cufflinks, scanning the crowd. "Success," he said coolly, "isn't just about money, it's about control." From a distance, Grace Miller stood near the back entrance of the ballroom, wearing a simple black dress that hugged her frame but carried no label. She wasn't there as a guest. She was there with purpose. Her invitation had come from Noah, slipped into her mailbox that morning with a note. "Tonight's the night. Bring courage." Her heart pounded as she looked around the sea of glittering faces. 3 years ago, she'd been invisible among them. Tonight, she was about to become unforgettable. Noah stood by the champagne tower, posing as a guest, his phone discreetly recording the event. When Grace caught his eye, he nodded once. Calm, certain. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced into the microphone, Please welcome the visionary behind this year's charity program, Ms. Madison Hale." Thunderous applause filled the room as Madison took the stage, glowing under the spotlight. "We at Carter Holdings believe every child deserves opportunity," she began. "This initiative, funded by my husband's generosity, will provide arts and education grants for underprivileged students." Grace's chest tightened, her initiative, her idea, her words stolen again. She watched as Madison basked in the applause, her smile almost saintly. Then Liam joined her on stage, draping an arm around her waist as flashbulbs erupted. Together, they looked untouchable, until the lights flickered. At first it seemed like a glitch. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the crowd. Then, on the giant LED screen behind the stage, the video changed. It wasn't the charity promo. It was raw, unfiltered footage, emails, documents, voice recordings. Madison's voice filled the room, echoing through the speakers. "Transfer the scholarship money to my account. Grace Miller will take the blame if it leaks." The audience gasped. Liam's face drained of color. Madison spun around, horrified. "Turn that off. Turn it off." But it was too late. The screen flashed again, this time security footage of Madison and Liam laughing in Grace's old living room the night they threw her out. Liam's voice sneered, "She's nothing. By the time she figures it out, we'll already own everything." A hush fell. Cameras turned toward them, recording every expression, every drop of panic. From the shadows, Grace stepped forward, her heels clicking against marble like thunder. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her face on the screen, her tears, her humiliation, was now replaced by the real thing, calm, steady vengeance. Madison's microphone clattered to the floor. Liam grabbed her arm. "What did you do?" he hissed. She shook her head, trembling. "It wasn't me. It's impossible." The crowd erupted into murmurs, reporters scrambling for quotes, the perfect scandal blossoming before their eyes. Grace stood tall, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You said I was nothing," she said softly. "Let's see how it feels to lose everything." And as the ballroom fell into pandemonium, one thing became clear. Grace Miller was no longer the woman they threw away. She was the reckoning they never saw coming. The gala ended in chaos that no publicist could clean up. Reporters swarmed the ballroom like sharks in bloody water. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved in faces, and security tried desperately to contain the madness. Madison Hale stood frozen on stage, makeup streaking under the hot lights, her hands shaking as the crowd hurled questions like stones. "Did you embezzle charity funds, Miss Hale? Were you involved in the Carter Holdings fraud? Is it true you stole your husband's ex-wife's project?" Liam Carter's jaw clenched so tightly that a vein pulsed in his temple. He pushed through the reporters, dragging Madison by the wrist. "No comment," he barked, his voice echoing off marble and chandeliers. "Liam," Madison protested, stumbling in her stilettos. "We have to explain." "Explain what?" he snapped. "That you were stupid enough to get caught?" Her breath hitched. "You're the one who—" "Shut up," he hissed. "Not here." The cameras followed them as they stormed through the lobby and out into the flashing night. Their limo door slammed, cutting off the noise, but not the fury between them. Inside, Madison's voice trembled. "You said the files were deleted. You promised no one could trace anything to us." Liam's face twisted with rage. "Do you think I planned this? You were supposed to handle PR, Madison. You were supposed to control the narrative." Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't of remorse. They were of fear. "We're finished, Liam. This video will destroy us." He stared out the tinted window, his tone turning cold. "Not us. You." Madison blinked. "What?" "I'll deny everything. You're the one who signed the transfers. You'll take the fall." Her blood ran cold. "You can't do that to me." "I already did it to my wife," he said flatly. "What makes you special?" The words sliced through her like glass. For the first time, Madison realized what Grace must have felt that night in the rain. Discarded, disposable, unlovable. Back at the Astoria, Grace watched the chaos unfold from a quiet corner near the exit. She wasn't smiling, but there was a calm satisfaction in her eyes. Noah appeared beside her, his phone still recording. "You got your justice," he said quietly. Grace shook her head. "Not yet. This was just the beginning." Noah studied her face. "What's next?" "Court," she said simply. "He'll try to bury this under legal silence, but I'm not afraid anymore." Noah nodded. "Then I'll be there, with evidence this time." As they walked to the cool night air, rain began to fall again, soft and steady. Grace tilted her face upward, letting it wash over her. The storm no longer scared her. It felt like renewal. The next morning, the internet exploded. Every major news outlet replayed the footage from the gala. Madison exposed, and justice for Grace trended across the country. Sponsors withdrew from Carter Holdings, stock prices plummeted, and journalists camped outside Liam's mansion. Madison tried to issue a statement, claiming she'd been hacked. No one believed her. By noon, paparazzi caught her sobbing on the steps of her PR firm. Mascara smeared, her once flawless image shattered. Liam's crisis manager quit within hours. "You can't spin a conscience, sir," she said before walking out. Alone in his penthouse, Liam hurled a glass against the wall, watching it shatter like his empire. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. He answered. A familiar voice spoke on the other end, calm, steady, merciless. "Hello, Liam," Grace said. "It's been a while." He froze. "What do you want?" She paused just long enough for him to feel the weight of it. "An apology," she said. "And after that, everything you owe." And before he could respond, the line went dead, leaving only silence and the sound of his own downfall beginning. 3 days after the gala, the city woke to headlines that read like the fall of an empire. Grace Miller files $50 million lawsuit against Carter Holdings for fraud and defamation. Every TV anchor, every talk show host, every news site, everyone was talking about the same woman the world once pitied. Now, they called her fearless. At 9 a.m., Grace stepped out of a cab in front of the King County Courthouse. Gone was the timid wife people remembered. She wore a navy blazer, her hair pulled back, her chin high. Reporters shouted her name as flashes erupted like gunfire. Noah Bennett walked beside her, calm and confident, a briefcase in hand. "Miss Miller, do you have a comment?" "Yes," Grace said, her voice steady. "This isn't revenge, it's accountability." Inside the courtroom, Liam Carter sat at the defendant's table, pale but still posturing. His lawyer, a high-priced shark from New York, whispered furiously into his ear. Madison Hale sat 2 seats away, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes. The woman who once commanded rooms now looked small, trembling, lost. Judge Whitaker entered, an older man with a stern expression and a reputation for fairness. "Miss Miller," he began, "you're representing yourself with Mr. Bennett as counsel." "Yes, Your Honor." The proceedings began. Noah presented a series of documents, emails showing Grace's scholarship proposal written years before Carter Holdings had filed it under Madison's name. Screenshots of texts where Madison bragged about cleaning out the charity fund. Wire transfers. Deleted files recovered from cloud storage. Every detail painted the same picture. Betrayal wrapped in luxury. Liam tried to remain composed, but sweat gathered at his temples. "This is nonsense," he muttered. "She's bitter. She's making this up." Grace turned to him calmly. "You told me I was nothing. I built your charity, your image, your legacy. All you ever gave me in return was humiliation." Madison flinched at Grace's words. Her hands shook as Noah played an audio recording, her voice from a phone call weeks before the gala. "The wife's a ghost now. Once I'm Mrs. Carter, no one will even remember her name." Gasps filled the courtroom. Madison's lawyer buried his face in his hands. Judge Whitaker slammed his gavel. "Order." But the real bombshell came next. Noah approached the bench with a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, new evidence, obtained legally from the Washington State Ethics Board." The judge opened the file. His expression changed. Then slowly he looked up. "Is this accurate?" "It is," Noah said. "It confirms that the presiding judge for Mrs. Miller's original divorce case, Judge Richard Hale, was directly related to Miss Madison Hale." The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Madison went rigid. "No, that's a lie." But it wasn't. Her father had been the one to sign off on Grace's unfair settlement years ago, ensuring Liam kept everything. Conflict of interest. Judicial fraud. Judge Whitaker's gavel cracked again. "Silence. This court will investigate immediately." He turned toward Madison. "Miss Hale, you're facing contempt charges and possible federal inquiry." Madison's voice broke into a whisper. "Daddy promised it would never come out." Liam glared at her, realizing the damage was irreversible. "You idiot," he hissed. "You've doomed us both." Grace sat silently, her hands folded. The woman once discarded in the rain now held the power to dismantle their empire with truth alone. When the session adjourned, reporters swarmed. "Grace, how does it feel to win?" She smiled faintly. "It's not over yet. Justice takes time, but it always arrives. Outside, thunder rolled across the Seattle sky, and as rain began to fall again, Grace whispered to herself, "Let it rain, let it all come clean." And somewhere deep inside the courthouse, Madison Hale began to cry. Not for guilt, but because she finally knew what fear felt like. Madison Hale had always believed she could control any story, until the story turned on her. The morning after court, her name trended worldwide for all the wrong reasons. Fraud Queen and Hale Gate flooded every social platform. Paparazzi camped outside her condo, and former friends from the fashion and PR worlds cut ties instantly. Even her sponsors, beauty brands, luxury events, the people who once begged for her presence, released statements denouncing her. She hadn't slept. The mirror reflected a ghost. Her perfect hair was tangled, her eyes swollen from tears. For the first time in her adult life, Madison didn't know what outfit to wear, because no amount of silk or diamonds could hide the truth. She was finished. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Madison." Liam's voice hissed. "You ruined everything." She laughed bitterly. "You're blaming me? You told me to move the money. You said no one would find out. You were supposed to cover it, not brag about it in texts. Don't you dare put this on me," she snapped, pacing across the living room. "I risked everything for you. I made you look good. Without me, your empire would have burned years ago." Liam's voice dropped to ice. "It's already burning, and when it's ash, I'll make sure your name is buried in it." He hung up. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then something inside Madison hardened. She wasn't going down alone. By noon, she was in her car, driving through the relentless Seattle rain toward a luxury high-rise. She knew exactly where Liam was hiding, his private penthouse office at Carter Holdings. The security guard hesitated when she stormed in, heels clicking like gunfire. "I'm here to see Mr. Carter," she said coolly, flashing a fake smile. When she entered his office, Liam was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp. "Sell the remaining shares before the board meets. I don't care if it's illegal, just do it." He turned, startled, when Madison spoke. "Illegal? That's a good look for you, Liam." He glared. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh, but I should," she said, stepping closer. "Because if I go down, so do you. I've got copies of everything. The bank transfers, the private messages, the fake charity receipts. If I hand those to the FBI, you'll be wearing orange before the month's over." Liam's expression didn't flicker. He poured himself a drink. "You won't do it. You're too addicted to this life." "Try me." For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The rain outside beat against the glass like applause from a cruel audience. Finally, Liam smiled, a dangerous, empty smile. "Fine, let's make a deal." She crossed her arms. "I'm listening." He gestured to the desk. A thick envelope lay there. $500,000, you disappear, no press, no interviews, you vanish, and I clean up this mess. Madison stared at it. $500,000. Once, that kind of money would have made her tremble. Now, it just felt like hush money soaked in guilt. She met his eyes. "You can't buy me anymore." Then she pulled a small flash drive from her purse and dropped it on his desk. "That's every document you thought you destroyed. A copy's already with my lawyer. You wanted a war, Liam? You've got one." As she turned to leave, Liam's voice followed her, cold and venomous. "You'll regret this." Without looking back, Madison said, "I already do." Outside, cameras flashed as she stepped into the storm. The same storm Grace had once faced alone, but this time it wasn't just Grace fighting back. Madison Hale had become a weapon of destruction aimed at the man who created her. By dawn, the empire Liam Carter had spent 15 years building was cracking from every direction. The morning news hit like a bomb. Federal investigation launched into Carter Holdings, following new evidence provided by insider source. Every financial channel ran the same footage. Agents in dark suits walking into the company's headquarters, carrying boxes, seizing computers, freezing accounts. Liam watched from his penthouse, jaw clenched, his tie undone, eyes bloodshot. He flipped from one network to another, hoping for a different story, a different truth. There wasn't one. "Sir," his assistant stammered over the phone, "the board members are resigning. The investors want out. The SEC." "Handle it," Liam shouted, hurling his phone against the wall. It shattered like glass streams. A knock at the door made him whirl around. He expected security, or worse, the press. Instead, it was Noah Bennett. Calm, composed, deadly polite. "You shouldn't be here." Liam spat. "You're trespassing." "I'm here on behalf of Grace Miller," Noah replied evenly. "She's offering you a settlement. Sign the company over to the board, pay restitution for the stolen charity funds, and she'll withdraw the personal defamation suit. You'll still face the federal charges, but at least your kids won't watch you rot in prison." Liam's laughter was hollow. "You think I'll bow to that woman? She wouldn't have a roof over her head if not for me." Noah's eyes didn't waver. "You're mistaken, Liam. She has something you never did." "And what's that? A conscience?" Before Liam could respond, the elevator chimed. 2 federal agents stepped out, badges raised. "Liam Carter," one said, "you're under investigation for corporate fraud and obstruction of justice. We need you to come with us." Liam froze, the blood draining from his face. "You can't be serious. I'm Liam Carter." "Exactly," the agent said dryly. "That's why it's serious." As they let him out, cameras were already waiting. The image of the billionaire in handcuffs hit every news feed within minutes. Comment sections filled with outrage, mockery, and disbelief. Meanwhile, Madison Hale sat in a coffee shop across the street, watching it unfold on her phone. For a moment, she felt a sick satisfaction. He deserved it. Every bit of it. But when the anchor mentioned her name next, linking her to the crimes, her stomach twisted. There was no clean escape. She had brought him down, but in doing so, she'd destroyed herself too. Back at the courthouse, Grace sat in a quiet waiting room with her twins. Ethan and Eli played with toy cars on the floor while she watched the rain slide down the windows. Noah entered, his expression softening when he saw her. "It's done," he said gently. "He's in custody." Grace exhaled, a breath she'd been holding for 3 years. "I thought I'd feel happy," she murmured, "but all I feel is tired." "That's what justice feels like sometimes," Noah said. "It doesn't shout. It just settles." Grace looked at her boys, their laughter echoing in the room. "Then maybe that's enough." Outside, reporters shouted her name as she left the courthouse. But this time, Grace didn't hide. She stopped, looked straight into the cameras, and said, "You can take everything from a person, but you can't erase the truth." That quote would be replayed across the country for days, inspiring thousands of women who had once been silent. And as night fell, the same storm that had once witnessed her downfall now thundered over Liam Carter's empire, washing away his name, his pride, and his lies. For every empire built on cruelty, there comes a day when the rain won't stop. That day had finally come for Liam Carter. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled every seat, cameras lined the back wall, and the air buzzed with a tension thick enough to choke on. Madison Hale sat at the defendant's table, her face pale, her hands trembling. The once polished PR queen now looked like a ghost of her former self. Her expensive suit hung loosely from her shoulders. Her eyes darted from side to side, desperate for an ally. But there were none left. Across from her, Grace Miller sat quietly beside Noah Bennett. She didn't gloat, she didn't smile, she simply waited. After 3 years of humiliation, pain, and loss, she was no longer a victim. She was the storm's calm center. "Court is now in session," Judge Whitaker announced, adjusting his glasses. "We're here to continue proceedings regarding Carter Holdings and its affiliates. Miss Hale, you are required to answer for the perjury and financial misconduct charges brought against you." Madison swallowed hard. "Your Honor, I didn't act alone. Liam Carter." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Carter's criminal proceedings are being handled separately. Today, we are addressing your involvement." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Madison's lawyer shifted nervously beside her, whispering, "Stay calm. Don't antagonize the judge." But Madison wasn't listening. Panic clawed at her chest. The flash of cameras through the glass window reminded her this was being broadcast live. The world was watching her unravel. "Your Honor," Noah began, standing with measured composure, "we have evidence that Miss Hale not only falsified financial documents but also manipulated the original divorce proceedings between Mr. and Mrs. Carter through her father, Judge Richard Hale." The name hit the room like thunder. Madison's eyes widened. "No," she whispered. Noah continued, sliding a folder across the bench. "These are transcripts from private communications between Miss Hale and her father. They confirm she influenced the outcome of Mrs. Miller's case, ensuring Mr. Carter retained all assets." The judge's expression hardened as he read the documents. "Miss Hale, do you deny this?" Tears welled in Madison's eyes. He told me it would never come out. He said he'd protect me." Grace's voice was calm but unyielding. "He protected you while you destroyed other people's lives." Madison turned toward her. "You don't understand. I grew up watching my father lose everything because of corruption. I thought if I could control the game, I'd never be powerless again." Grace shook her head slowly. "And in trying to escape corruption, you became it." Madison's lip quivered. She opened her mouth to speak, but the judge's voice cut her off. "Miss Hale," he said firmly, "this court finds sufficient grounds to recommend federal indictment for judicial interference and fraud. You will be remanded into custody, pending formal charges." The color drained from her face. "Please, Your Honor, I can't." Her plea dissolved into sobs. The courtroom watched as the bailiff approached, gently taking her by the arm. The woman who once strutted in designer heels now stumbled, her legs weak. The flash of cameras outside the door was relentless. And then, in the most unexpected moment of the entire trial, Judge Whitaker turned toward Grace. His voice softened. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "on behalf of this court, I owe you an apology. The justice system failed you once. It will not fail you again." Gasps filled the room. Grace blinked, stunned. For years, she dreamed of hearing those words. But now that they came, she didn't feel triumph, only release. As Madison was led away in tears, Grace stood, her twin's photo clasped in her hand. The crowd parted silently as she walked past the cameras, the woman they'd called poor wife, now walking tall under the courtroom's harsh lights. Behind her, Madison's sobs echoed through the marble halls, proof that no lie, no luxury, and no power lasts forever. The morning after Madison Hale's collapse in court, sunlight broke through the heavy Seattle clouds for the first time in weeks. Grace Miller stood on her small balcony, a cup of coffee in her hands, watching the light spill across the city. The headlines were everywhere. Judge apologizes to poor wife, billionaire's mistress arrested for fraud. It didn't feel real. Her phone buzzed non-stop, calls from reporters, TV producers, women's organizations. They all wanted her story, but Grace didn't answer. She wasn't chasing fame. She'd already found something better. Peace. Down the hall, Ethan and Eli's laughter echoed as they played with their toy trucks. For 3 years, that sound had been her heartbeat, her reason to wake up. Now, as she listened, she realized this was the real victory. But justice wasn't finished yet. At noon, Noah Bennett arrived at her apartment with a folder and his usual calm expression. "It's over," he said, setting the papers on her table. "The board voted this morning. Carter Holdings is being dismantled. Assets are being sold to repay the charity funds. You've been offered full ownership of the educational foundation you created. It's officially yours again." Grace blinked, barely able to process it. "You mean the foundation?" He smiled. "The Grace Miller Music Scholarship Fund. It's already trending online. People are donating. You've started a movement." She covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "After everything, it's finally real." Noah nodded. "Because you didn't give up, and because truth always wins, it just takes time." Later that afternoon, Grace returned to the courthouse for the final hearing on her personal case against Liam Carter. The courtroom was quieter now, emptied of reporters and flashing lights. Liam sat at the defense table, his once tailored suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. The arrogance that once filled every word was gone. "Mr. Carter," Judge Whitaker said sternly, "you've agreed to full restitution and forfeiture of your controlling shares. Do you wish to make a statement before sentencing?" Liam stood slowly, glancing at Grace. "I thought money could fix everything," he said quietly. "Turns out it only buried me deeper. I'm sorry, Grace, for what it's worth." Grace's voice was calm. "It's worth nothing, Liam, but I hope one day it means something to you." He nodded, defeated, as the bailiff led him away. When it was over, the judge turned to Grace. "You may have lost everything once, Mrs. Miller, but you built something greater in return." Outside, reporters waited again, cameras ready. This time, Grace didn't shy away. She stood behind a row of microphones, her twins watching from Noah's arms nearby. "To every woman who's ever been told she's not enough," Grace began, her voice clear and strong, "you are. You don't need revenge to win, you just need truth, and the courage to keep standing." The crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't just a press moment, it was a reckoning. That evening, Grace visited the quiet corner of the hospital where Ethan and Eli had been born 3 years before. She left a single white lily at the nurse's desk with a note that read, "For helping me bring light into the darkest night." As she stepped outside, the sunset painted the sky gold and pink. Seattle glowed beneath it, washed clean by the endless rain. Noah joined her on the sidewalk. "So what now?" he asked softly. Grace smiled. "Now we live." He looked at her for a long moment, admiration soft in his eyes. "You did it, Grace." She shook her head gently. "No, we did." And as the city lights flickered to life, Grace Miller walked forward. No longer the poor wife with twins, but the woman who turned heartbreak into legacy. 6 months later, Seattle had changed. But no one had changed more than Grace Miller. The world that once looked down on her now lifted her up. The Grace Miller Foundation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What started as a small scholarship fund now supported hundreds of underprivileged children across the state. Her name had become a symbol of resilience, proof that truth could survive even the ugliest lies. But Grace didn't live for headlines. She lived for mornings like this. The twins were at the breakfast table, laughing over spilled syrup and arguing about who could eat more pancakes. Sunlight streamed through the apartment window, landing softly on their golden hair. It was the kind of peace she dreamed about while crying in the rain years ago. Her phone buzzed. It was Noah. "Big news. Turn on Channel 7. She did. The screen showed Madison Hale in handcuffs, escorted out of a courthouse. The caption read, "Madison Hale sentenced to 5 years for fraud and perjury." Grace's breath caught. She hadn't expected to feel anything, but a quiet ache stirred in her chest. She didn't hate Madison anymore. The woman who destroyed her had already destroyed herself. "Mommy, who's that?" Ethan asked, pointing at the TV. Grace turned it off gently. "Just someone who forgot what kindness means," she said. At noon, Grace met Noah at a small cafe overlooking the waterfront. The air smelled of coffee and ocean salt. He was already seated, papers spread across the table. "You're impossible to schedule," he teased. "The most requested speaker in Washington state." Grace rolled her eyes, smiling. "I'm not used to being busy for good reasons." He handed her a folder. "These are new applications for next year's scholarship program. You'll need to sign off." She flipped through them, pausing at one name, Madison Hale Community Arts Center. Grace blinked. "What is this?" "It's a proposal," Noah said carefully. "Apparently, Madison's mother donated her estate to convert an old building into a center for kids. Madison requested your foundation manage it." Grace went silent. The irony was staggering. Madison, who once tried to erase her, was now entrusting her legacy to her former rival. Finally, Grace whispered, "Let's do it. Those kids deserve a chance, no matter whose name is on the door." Noah smiled softly. "That's why you're you." The afternoon faded into gold. They walked along the pier with coffee in hand, watching seagulls dip over the waves. For the first time, Grace let herself breathe, fully, freely. "I used to think winning meant making them suffer," she admitted quietly. "Now I think winning means never becoming like them." Noah looked at her, admiration in his eyes. "You became everything they said you couldn't." Grace turned toward the horizon. "And I'll keep becoming more." That evening, she stood before a crowd at the first Grace Miller Foundation Gala. The ballroom glittered with light, filled not with billionaires and arrogance, but with teachers, single mothers, and students who'd received scholarships. Grace took the microphone, her voice warm and steady. "A few years ago, I walked into a courthouse with nothing but 2 babies in my arms and a heart full of fear. Today, I stand here surrounded by hope. This foundation isn't about my story. It's about what comes after pain. It's about rebuilding." The audience rose to their feet, clapping through tears. Ethan and Eli ran to her on stage, hugging her legs. Cameras flashed, but this time it wasn't scandal. It was triumph. And as the applause thundered through the hall, Grace Miller finally understood. Her new beginning wasn't the end of her story. It was the start of her legacy. Autumn came early that year. The leaves along Seattle's waterfront turned copper and gold, painting the city in soft melancholy. Grace Miller walked through the quiet park with her twins, holding their little hands as the breeze whispered through the trees. Life had finally settled into something that felt like peace. But peace, she was learning, had a way of being temporary. Her phone rang, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Miller?" The voice was formal, steady. "This is Officer Delgado from the state penitentiary. We thought you should know. Liam Carter has filed for an early release hearing." Grace stopped walking. The sound of her children's laughter faded into the background. "What?" "He's claiming good behavior and restitution payments through his frozen assets," the officer explained. "The court will review it next month. You have the right to attend or submit a statement." Grace's pulse quickened. It had been nearly a year since she'd last seen Liam, since the courtroom where he'd looked at her with hollow eyes and spoken the words, "I'm sorry." She'd told herself she'd never face him again. But now the past was clawing its way back. That night, she sat at her desk long after the twins were asleep. Old files were scattered across the table, news clippings, transcripts, photographs. Every headline screamed the story of her pain. Yet when she looked at them now, she didn't feel fear. She felt clarity. Noah called just after midnight. "You heard about the hearing?" "Yes," Grace said softly. "I need to be there." "Are you sure? You don't owe him anything, Grace. You already won." She looked out the window, the moonlight reflecting off the sound. "It's not about winning anymore. It's about closure." The day of the hearing arrived gray and wet, the kind of weather that always seemed to follow her story. Reporters lined the courthouse steps again, though this time their cameras weren't hostile, they were curious. The woman once known as the poor wife with twins had become a symbol of redemption. Inside, Liam Carter looked older, smaller. His hair was grayer, his once perfect posture slightly slouched. When he saw Grace enter, he flinched. Judge Whitaker presided again, his voice steady. "Mr. Carter, the board will consider your release based on rehabilitation and restitution. Mrs. Miller has chosen to speak." Grace stood slowly. The courtroom was silent. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm but clear, "3 years ago, this man took everything from me, my home, my reputation, my dignity. But what he didn't take was my strength. I built a new life out of the ashes he left behind. And while I believe in forgiveness, I also believe in consequence." She turned toward Liam. Their eyes met. "You taught me that money without integrity is just debt with interest. You'll have to live with what you did. I already have." Liam lowered his gaze, unable to meet her stare. For the first time, Grace didn't feel anger, only finality. When she sat down, Noah leaned close and whispered, "That was the most powerful silence I've ever heard." The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, this board denies your early release. You'll serve your remaining sentence in full." Gasps rippled through the room. Liam closed his eyes, his last ounce of arrogance crumbling. Outside, reporters surrounded Grace, microphones flashing like sparks. One shouted, "Mrs. Miller, how does it feel to know he's staying behind bars?" Grace smiled softly. "Justice isn't revenge," she said. "It's peace." As she walked away, Noah held the door for her. Rain began to fall again, gentle and cleansing. And for the first time, the sound of rain didn't remind Grace of pain. It sounded like freedom. Winter crept over Seattle like a slow silver tide. The air carried the smell of rain and cedar, and Grace Miller found herself busier than ever. The Grace Miller Foundation had expanded to 3 states, and donations flooded in faster than her small staff could process. Every morning began with gratitude and exhaustion. But on one gray afternoon, as she packed up from a board meeting, Noah Bennett walked into her office with an expression she hadn't seen before. Serious. Hesitant. "There's something you need to see," he said quietly, handing her a thick envelope stamped with a New York law firm's insignia. Grace frowned, sliding her finger under the seal. Inside were legal documents and a single letter typed in sharp black ink. "Dear Mrs. Miller, on behalf of Whitmore Global Investments, we are authorized to inform you that your late grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, has named you as the primary successor to her estate. The trust, valued at $480 million, will transfer ownership upon your formal acceptance." Grace's breath caught. "This has to be a mistake. My grandmother disowned me years ago." Noah shook his head. "It's real. I verified the firm. Eleanor Whitmore passed away last month. She didn't forget you, Grace. She just waited until you didn't need her money anymore." Grace sank into her chair, stunned. The room spun slightly. She'd spent years building her life from nothing, that proving her worth without a cent of privilege. And now, the fortune she once rejected had found its way back to her. She whispered, "I don't want it." Noah leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "You don't have to keep it." but you could use it to grow the foundation, to help people who were where you once were. Grace's thoughts tumbled. For so long, wealth had been the weapon that destroyed her. Now it was being handed to her as redemption. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stood by her window, watching the city lights blink through the drizzle. Every choice she made had been about survival. This one would define her future. The next morning, she called the law firm. "I'll accept the inheritance," she said. "But the first transfer goes directly to charity. I don't want a mansion, I want a legacy." News spread quickly. Grace Miller, the once poor wife, inherits nearly $500 million, plans to donate majority to education reform. The story went viral again, but this time Grace wasn't a scandal. She was a symbol. A week later, at the Foundation's annual conference, investors and donors gathered in a downtown ballroom. Grace stood at the podium in a sleek black dress, humble but radiant. Noah introduced her to the stage. "She taught us that strength doesn't come from money," he said, "but from what you do when you have nothing left." Grace took the microphone. "Years ago, I thought wealth was the measure of success. Then I lost everything, and realized true wealth is the power to rebuild, not for yourself, but for others." Applause filled the room, echoing like thunder. Reporters scribbled every word, cameras flashing. When the event ended, a quiet figure approached her, a woman in her 50s with a familiar softness in her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," she said, voice trembling, "I was Madison Hale's mother. Thank you for what you're doing with the Art Center. She may never say it, but she's grateful." Grace nodded gently. "Tell her she's forgiven." Outside, snow began to fall, soft and pure, blanketing the city that had witnessed her rise and ruin. Grace looked up, feeling the flakes melt against her skin. Once she'd walked through rain carrying pain. Now she walked through snow carrying purpose. The world called Grace Miller untouchable now, but deep down she knew peace wasn't something you bought, it was something you earned every day. After months of media praise and global attention, she finally had a moment to breathe. Yet something inside her still felt unfinished. One evening, as the first snow of February dusted the streets, she received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Grace, if you still believe in forgiveness, please come. There's something I need to tell you before I disappear completely. Madison Hale." Grace read the note twice. She wasn't sure why her hands were trembling. Anger, curiosity, maybe even pity. Noah tried to dissuade her. "Grace, you don't owe that woman a second of your time. She used you, destroyed you." Grace looked out the window at the drifting snow. "Maybe that's true," she said softly, "but closure doesn't come from silence." The next morning, she drove 2 hours outside the city to a rehabilitation facility tucked between frozen pines. Madison was there under protective custody, serving the last of her sentence through community restitution. The guards led Grace down a narrow hallway until she reached a small visitor's room. When Madison entered, Grace almost didn't recognize her. The glamorous mistress was gone. Her once golden hair was cut short, her face pale, her eyes heavy with remorse. She sat across from Grace, hands shaking slightly. "You came," Madison whispered, disbelief coloring her voice. Grace nodded. "You asked." For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched until Madison broke it with a cracked voice. "I wanted you to hate me. It was easier that way. But then I saw what you did, with the foundation, with the kids. You turned everything I used to mock into something beautiful. And I realized I destroyed the wrong person." Grace's eyes softened, but her tone stayed firm. "You didn't destroy me. You taught me what strength looks like." Madison blinked back tears. "You should know, Liam didn't plan to ruin you completely. That was me. I sent those fake emails to the press. I wanted your name gone because it reminded me of everything I wasn't." The words landed like small stones in Grace's chest. Pain, yes, but no surprise. She had already made peace with the truth. Madison continued, voice trembling. "There's one more thing. The charity account, the one we stole from, it's not empty. Before my arrest, I moved the last of the funds to a private trust. I couldn't bring myself to spend it. It's still there. It belongs to you." Grace inhaled sharply. "Why are you telling me this now?" Madison looked at her with hollow eyes. "Because confession doesn't fix anything, but it helps you breathe before the end." Grace stood slowly. "Then breathe, Madison. Let this be your beginning, not your punishment." Madison's lips trembled. "Do you forgive me?" Grace hesitated, then reached across the table, resting her hand lightly over Madison's. Forgiveness isn't about you, it's about setting myself free, and I'm free. Madison broke down, sobbing quietly. The guards turned away, giving them space. When Grace left the facility, the sky was turning pink with dawn. Snowflakes danced in the air, melting on her coat. She felt lighter than she had in years. As she reached her car, Noah called. "You okay?" Grace smiled faintly. "Yeah. She told me everything?" "Everything?" "Enough," Grace said, looking back one last time. Because sometimes victory doesn't come from revenge, it comes from mercy. And mercy, she realized, was the final step toward peace. Snow still blanketed Seattle when Grace Miller returned from the rehabilitation center. The city glowed beneath the streetlights, clean and quiet, as if it too had turned a new page. But peace never came without a whisper from the past, and that whisper arrived 3 days later in the form of an unexpected visitor. Noah met her at the office early that morning. "There's someone here to see you," he said carefully. "From Whitmore Global." Grace frowned. "The lawyers?" He shook his head. "Not exactly. It's a man who claims to have worked directly with your grandmother." In the conference room waited an older gentleman in a gray suit, his posture impeccable, his eyes sharp but kind. He introduced himself as Thomas Avery, Eleanor Whitmore's former financial advisor. "Mrs. Miller," he began, sliding a sealed file across the table, "before your grandmother passed, she instructed me to deliver this to you once you had accepted the inheritance." Grace hesitated before opening it. Inside was a letter in Eleanor's delicate handwriting and a USB drive wrapped in gold ribbon. "My dearest Grace, you were right to leave when you did. I was wrong to let pride and business harden me. This fortune you inherit isn't just money, it's a burden that carries truth. Whitmore Global's wealth was not built cleanly. Decades ago, your grandfather made deals that cost innocent people everything. I tried to make it right, but the past is stubborn. You must decide whether to protect the Whitmore name or finally set it free." Grace's stomach turned as she finished reading. "She's saying this money was built on corruption?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "It seems your grandmother spent her final years investigating her own empire. The USB drive holds evidence, transactions, documents, proof of how Whitmore Global accumulated its power. If you go public, it will destroy the company, but it will also expose a legacy of wrongdoing." Noah leaned forward. "Grace, if this is real, you could dismantle one of the biggest financial empires in the country." Grace's hands trembled around the letter, "and erase the name that built my family." That night she couldn't sleep. The snow outside glittered like shards of conscience. She sat by the fireplace, the USB drive resting in her palm. For years, she had fought to reclaim her own integrity. Now she had to decide whether to sacrifice her family's. The next morning, she met Noah at a cafe overlooking the frozen harbor. "If I release this," she said, "it'll ruin hundreds of people who still work there. But if I hide it, I'm no better than the ones who buried the truth before me." Noah studied her. "What does your heart say?" Grace looked out the window, the reflection of snowflakes flickering across her face. "That truth hurts less than lies do in the long run." That afternoon, she called a press conference. Cameras crowded the room once again, the same relentless lights that had once watched her fall. Grace stood behind the podium, calm, resolute. "My name is Grace Miller," she began, "and I am the heir to the Whitmore fortune. But before I accept it fully, I must tell you what it truly is, a legacy built on the pain of others." Gasps filled the room. She continued, voice unwavering. "I'm transferring every cent of the Whitmore estate into a reparations fund for the families affected by its past. Wealth without conscience is a curse, and I refuse to pass it on." The applause was stunned, then thunderous. Later, as she walked outside into the falling snow, Noah joined her. "You just gave away $500 million, he said softly. Grace smiled. "No, I finally earned it." And as the snow melted against her skin, Grace realized her grandmother's fortune hadn't cursed her. It had given her one last chance to rewrite the family name with truth. Spring arrived early in Seattle, soft and unexpected. The rain had gentled into mist, and cherry blossoms framed the streets outside Grace Miller's foundation office. Life was finally quiet again, but Grace had learned to recognize the quiet. It was the sound that came right before destiny whispered again. One morning, while she was reviewing scholarship applications, Her assistant entered with a small brown envelope. "This came through the private mailbox," she said. "No return address." Grace thanked her, curiosity stirring. She turned the envelope over and froze when she saw the handwriting. Elegant, looping, unmistakable. It was Eleanor Whitmore's. Her heart thudded as she broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter and an old photograph of a young woman holding a baby, her mother. The back of the photo read, "For Grace when she's ready to understand." Grace unfolded the letter. "My dearest granddaughter, if you are reading this, then you have chosen truth over comfort, just as I hoped you would. But there is one more truth you deserve to know about your mother. You were told she died when you were young. That wasn't entirely true. Your mother, Amelia Whitmore, didn't die. She disappeared. She rejected this family's fortune and power the same way you did. She wanted to raise you free from it. When she passed away years later, she left behind letters I never sent and regrets I never confessed. Among those regrets was a secret I've carried for decades. One of the Whitmore board members who wronged your grandfather still holds stolen assets under a different name. If you choose to pursue them, it could bring justice to the people we hurt, but it could also reignite the very empire you dismantled. The choice, my dear, is yours." Grace lowered the letter, her chest tight. The words felt heavy, alive with ghosts. She turned the photo over again, tracing her mother's smiling face. "You walked away so I could be free," she whispered, "and now I have to decide if freedom means letting go or fighting again." Noah entered a few minutes later, holding 2 coffees. "You look like you just saw a ghost." Grace handed him the letter. He read silently, his expression softening into concern. "She left you one last decision." "Yes," Grace said quietly, "and it's the hardest one yet." Noah set the letter down. "You've already exposed the truth about Whitmore Global. Maybe that's enough." Grace shook her head slowly. "Enough for me, maybe, but not for the people who still lost everything because of it. If there's a way to return what was stolen, I can't ignore it." Noah smiled faintly. "You really don't know how to stop fighting, do you?" She met his eyes. "I stopped once. It nearly killed me." That evening, Grace visited the small cemetery on Queen Anne Hill where Eleanor was buried. The sky blushed gold as the sun sank. She knelt beside the gravestone, the letter folded in her hands. "I forgive you," she whispered, "for everything you hid, for everything you tried to fix too late. I'll make it right for both of us." A soft breeze brushed her hair, carrying the scent of rain and cherry blossoms. It almost felt like an answer. When she returned home, her twins were waiting at the window, waving. Ethan shouted, "Mommy, the stars came out!" Grace smiled, her heart swelling. "Yes," she said softly, "they always do after the storm." She slipped Eleanor's letter into her journal, the final piece of a story written in pain, love, and redemption. And as night fell over Seattle, Grace Miller realized that every ending her family had faced wasn't an end at all. It was an invitation to begin again. 2 weeks after receiving her grandmother's final letter, Grace Miller sat in her office long after sunset. The city glowed beneath her window, soft, golden, and alive. Yet inside her heart, a war raged quietly. The USB drive from Eleanor's envelope lay on her desk beside the photograph of her mother. Justice or peace? Exposure or forgiveness? Which one truly healed a wound that had lasted generations? Noah Bennett knocked gently before entering. "You're still here," he said, setting down a cup of chamomile tea. "You've been staring at that drive for hours." Grace sighed. "It holds the names of everyone who profited from Whitmore's corruption. People still alive, Noah. People who built their lives on stolen futures." He took a seat across from her. "If you expose them, you'll destroy more than just reputations. You'll erase an entire legacy." "That legacy destroyed others long before I was born," she said softly. "How can I build a future on a lie?" Noah studied her for a moment. "You could quietly reclaim what's left of the stolen funds. Help those families without reopening the wounds publicly. Justice doesn't always have to be loud." Grace looked out the window. Rain streaked the glass like veins of silver. "Maybe," she murmured. "But silence is how this family stayed powerful for a century. I can't keep their secrets anymore." She picked up the USB drive and turned it over in her hand. It was light, almost meaningless in weight, yet it held generations of guilt. The next morning, she called a meeting with her foundation's board. Reporters had caught wind of her grandmother's last letter, and speculation filled every news feed. Was the Whitmore name cursed? Was Grace planning to go public again? Noah sat beside her as she addressed the room. "What I'm about to share won't make us popular," she began, her voice clear and steady, "but it will make us honest." She connected the USB drive to the screen. A spreadsheet appeared, dozens of names, transactions, hidden shell companies, offshore accounts. The air in the room grew heavy. "These are the people and corporations that built their fortunes from Whitmore's unethical investments," Grace said. "We can either bury this, or we can expose it and create restitution funds for the communities they hurt." An older board member stood. "Mrs. Miller, this could bankrupt half the country's financial institutions. You'll make powerful enemies." Grace nodded. "Then I'll stand with the powerless, because that's who paid the price for our comfort." The vote was tense but unanimous in her favor. That afternoon, the documents went public through the Foundation's website. Within hours, the internet erupted. Major networks broke the story. Whitmore heir exposes multi-billion-dollar corruption scandal. Lawsuits followed. Investigations opened. The country buzzed with shock and admiration. Grace became the face of moral courage, the woman who chose truth over power. But not everyone applauded. Anonymous threats flooded her inbox. One night, she found a note slipped under her door. "You should have stayed silent." Noah insisted on security. "You've shaken the richest hornet's nest in America," he warned. Grace smiled faintly. "Good. Maybe it's time they knew how it feels to be afraid." A week later, she spoke at a televised forum on ethics in business. Her closing words would be quoted for years. "When I lost everything, I thought my life was over. But losing what was false gave me back what was real. Truth costs, but silence costs souls." The audience stood, clapping through tears. Later, alone backstage, Grace looked up at the stage lights fading to gold. She whispered to herself, "Mom, Grandma, we did it. It's finally clean." And as thunder rumbled softly outside, Grace Miller understood that the choice she'd made hadn't just changed her life. It had changed the world. Fame had never been Grace Miller's goal. But after exposing one of the biggest corporate scandals in American history, fame found her anyway. Her name dominated every headline. Some called her a hero, others a traitor to her bloodline. Invitations to talk shows and conferences flooded her inbox, but so did threats. Every choice she'd made now lived under a spotlight. One night, as Seattle's skyline shimmered with rain, Noah Bennett showed up at her apartment, his coat soaked, his eyes grave. "They know where you live," he said quietly. "You need to move, at least for a while." Grace looked up from the table where her twins were coloring. "Who's they, Noah?" He hesitated. "One of the corporations you exposed, Astor Financial. They're being dismantled. Executives are furious. They think you're ruining the country's economy. Someone sent a warning to my office. It wasn't subtle." Grace exhaled slowly. Fear was a feeling she thought she'd buried years ago. But it stirred again now. Cold. Familiar. "Maybe they're just trying to scare us," she said. Noah shook his head. "They're trying to silence you." That night, after putting Ethan and Eli to bed, Grace stood by the window, watching lightning split the sky. Her reflection stared back. A woman who had survived betrayal, humiliation, and poverty, yet was still standing. But now the battle wasn't for herself. It was for truth, and truth came with a cost. The next morning, she woke to chaos. Reporters swarmed the front of her building. Drones buzzed overhead. Someone had leaked her home address. Her phone lit up with hundreds of calls, notifications, and one chilling message: "You don't know when to quit." Within hours, Noah arranged for her and the twins to relocate temporarily to a secure lake house outside the city. The air there was quieter, the nights darker. For the first time in weeks, she could hear the wind through the trees instead of the constant hum of cameras. But peace felt uneasy. One evening, while the twins slept, Noah joined her on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. The lake shimmered silver under the moonlight. "You know," he said softly, "most people would have taken the money, fixed their reputation, and disappeared. You went and changed the world instead." Grace smiled faintly. "I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted to tell the truth." He studied her face. "You realize you've become the truth. People look at you and see proof that integrity still exists." Her eyes glistened in the dim light, "and that's exactly why they want to destroy it." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the soft rhythm of rain on wood. Then Noah's phone buzzed. He frowned, reading a new alert. "Grace, it's bad." "What happened?" "They're calling for a federal inquiry on you. Some of the people tied to the Whitmore case are accusing you of data theft and illegal exposure. It's retaliation, but it's loud." Grace's heart sank. "They're turning my truth into a weapon?" Noah looked up, jaw tight. "Then we fight again. We've done it before." Grace nodded slowly, resolve hardening in her chest. "If they want to drag me through another storm, fine. I know how to walk through rain." Later that night, thunder rolled over the lake, echoing her heartbeat. Grace stood outside, barefoot, letting the rain soak her hair. It wasn't fear that filled her anymore. It was strength. Because storms no longer frightened her, they reminded her who she was. And somewhere deep in the darkness, Grace Miller promised herself, when this storm ended, no one would ever silence truth again. The hearing that would decide Grace Miller's fate arrived beneath a crimson sunrise. Reporters filled the courthouse steps, their cameras aimed like rifles. Once again, Grace, the woman the world had watched fall, rise, and fight, was at the center of a storm. This time, the accusation was clear: illegal data exposure, misuse of confidential evidence. It was the retaliation of the powerful, a desperate attempt to silence her truth. Inside, the air was tense. Noah Bennett sat beside her, his calm eyes masking the storm beneath. "You know they'll throw everything they have at you," he said quietly. Grace nodded. "They already did. I'm still here." The prosecutor, a sharp-faced woman representing the corporations Grace had exposed, wasted no time. "Mrs. Miller used illegally obtained data to damage American financial stability. She's no hero. She's an anarchist dressed in virtue." Grace didn't flinch. When her turn came, she rose and faced the courtroom. "If revealing corruption is a crime," she said softly, "then truth itself is illegal. I didn't destroy anything. I revealed what was already rotting beneath the surface." Her words rippled through the room. Even the judge seemed to pause before replying. "Proceed." For hours, evidence poured in. Noah cross-examined witness after witness, dismantling their accusations with precision. He showed the chain of custody proving Grace had acted within the law. Every document legally transferred through Eleanor Whitmore's estate. The corporation's case crumbled. Then, unexpectedly, the courtroom doors opened, and Madison Hale walked in. Gasps erupted. Dressed simply in a gray coat, her hair tied back, Madison approached the stand. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I was the one who retrieved the files Grace Miller used. She didn't steal them. I gave them to her." The courtroom went silent. The judge frowned. "Miss Hale, you're aware this confession could reinstate your sentence?" Madison nodded. "Yes, but I've hidden long enough. Grace didn't ruin us. She freed us from the lies we built." Grace's eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. Madison looked at her once, just once, and smiled faintly before stepping down. The judge cleared his throat. "This court finds no evidence of criminal misconduct. The charges against Mrs. Miller are dismissed with prejudice." The sound of the gavel echoed like thunder breaking the last of the storm. Grace exhaled shakily as Noah squeezed her hand. Outside, the courthouse exploded in applause and flashes. Reporters shouted questions, but Grace didn't stop to answer. She simply stood at the top of the courthouse steps, breathing in the crisp morning air. A young reporter finally asked, "Mrs. Miller, what's next for you?" Grace smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep peace. "To live quietly," she said, "to raise my sons, to keep teaching that truth isn't dangerous, it's healing." That evening, back at the lake house, Ethan and Eli ran through the grass chasing fireflies. Grace sat on the porch watching them laugh under the fading light. Noah joined her, carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. "You realize," he said, "you've changed more lives than any court ruling ever could." Grace looked at the water, reflecting the last rays of the sun. "I didn't set out to change lives. I just refused to stay silent." He smiled. "And that's why people listen to you." For a while they sat in silence, the world finally still. The storm had passed. Grace whispered, "You know, I used to think survival was enough, but now I know peace is better." The boys' laughter echoed through the twilight as stars began to appear. Grace leaned back, the weight of years lifting off her shoulders. And as dawn broke the next morning, Grace Miller stepped into the sunlight, not as the poor wife, not as the victim, but as the woman who turned her pain into power and her story into truth. So that's it, my dear friends. Our story finally comes to an end. And if you're still here, watching until this very moment, then maybe something in Grace's journey has touched your heart, just a little. You see, life doesn't always give us justice right away. Sometimes it gives us storms so we can learn how strong we truly are. Grace's story isn't just about revenge or pain, it's about rebirth. It's about finding peace after being broken, and understanding, as the Stoics once said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way." Every betrayal, every tear, every sleepless night, all of it shaped Grace into someone unbreakable. And maybe that's the same for you. Maybe the things that hurt you the most are actually the things that will heal you the deepest. So if this story made you feel something, hope, strength, maybe even a bit of peace, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight, and subscribe to our channel. Because somewhere out there, another Grace is still standing in the rain, and your share might be the light that leads her home.